I'm Robin Bennett, and Susan Briggs over there we are the two co-founders of the Dog Gurus, for those that have not met us before. And we help pet care businesses launch, grow, and profit. So we work with pet care businesses to help with them with consulting to help grow their business, and also staff training to help train your teams. And what we want to talk about today is really looking at the investment you make in your building, and whether you're just starting up or you're redesigning things. So I'm going to bring up our guest while Susan introduces him, because he's going to have all the answers for you today.
Yeah, so we're really pleased to have Scott Manning. He's a senior manager design and construction for Midmark. And for those of you who are familiar with Mason Kennels, Midmark purchased Mason a few years back, so they've worked together for quite a while. And Scott actually has over 14 years design experience with Midmark and working alongside clinicians and designers. He has quite the portfolio of proven design that optimize performance for the animal industry. And Midmark has a big portfolio of environmental solutions. And for the veterinary side, if we have any veterinarians out there, they also have Midmark Academy, which is continuing education platform. So they align with us on loving to educate the industry. And we know they have that in common with Mason and have carried that on. And Scott has a BS from Penn State University and an MBA from Gardner-Webb University. So Scott, we're thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Robin. Thrilled to be here.
We are happy to have you. And if you have questions, we have done presentations in the past with, back then, Mason. And so we know they have a wealth of knowledge. And it's funny because every time Susan and I would do a presentation, we would be talking about what you needed from the dog perspective, and they would be talking about what you needed from the design perspective. And every single time we would go, I didn't know that. Did you know that? We would learn. As long as we've been in the industry, they constantly teach us new things. So we love that. So I'm going to just ask a quick question to kick us off about design options that will help to implement spreading of disease in kennels. What do you look at when you're trying to help somebody find the best design option for some enclosures in their facility, the spread of disease?
Yeah, well, exactly. Regardless if you're a veterinarian or if you're doing boarding at an independent facility, obviously infection control is an important topic. And so whatever we can do to manufacture a product or provide a solution that's going to control any types of fluids going from one kennel to another, that's at top of mind for us. There's a number of things you can do. I would say the rule of thumb is to be seamless. And so you can do that with building materials that you select that are not made by a kennel manufacturer, or you can select the right type of kennel application that is airtight. So if you're looking at walls, you want something that's going to be attached to the floor and have the ability for you to power wash from one kennel into another, and basically no chemicals will seep underneath there. So there is new products out there that form an airtight application, and basically keeping anything that happens in that kennel and to be able to clean it the correct way through proper drainage.
I think that's real important, Scott, because I know that it can be tempting to maybe just go to the big box store and set up some enclosures, and most of those don't go all the way to the floor and they don't have that seal. And I think sometimes we don't realize how important that is for the health and safety and well-being of the animals.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of materials out there. There's certainly ways you can take shortcuts and save on costs up front. One of the key things is always select a non-organic material, meaning nothing that absorbs moisture or any dog urine or any type of chemicals or liquids that are going to be going on in a kennel. So if you start with a non-organic product or something that's seamless and the right material that's being able to be cleaned over and over, that's going to be your best bet.
Yeah, I think
go ahead, Susan.
Well, I think that's the other thing, is that the professional products and equipment that you guys provide, the cost can seem really high sometimes when you aren't used to this industry and if you're just getting started. But I think what people don't understand is you guys build and design that way for a reason, because you've worked in animal care for a long time. So it's for the health and safety of the animals, as well as the durability of the product and long term. The useful life of your enclosures, I don't know probably is almost forever.
Yeah, we do say although we have a warranty on every product, we do say if you buy a stainless steel kennel, if you treat it the right way, it should last you minimum 70 years. So these things are built to last for the life of the business. And so there's a number of different options out. Stainless steel is not always the way you want to go if you want to add color or just different design elements in there, but there's a lot of great finish options and material options that you can use to really add some color and pop to your facilities, but also made so that they're easy to clean and cut down on all kinds of crevices or any type of opportunity for bacteria and dirt to manifest and start growing.
Yeah, and I think making sure when we talk to people about whether they're redesigning or they're building new, that initial sticker price, as Susan mentioned, sometimes you do get shocked, but we always, whether it's design stuff inside or outside or play equipment or whatever it is, we always try to make sure people understand, don't just look at the initial cost. You have to look at the cost long term. So whether it's how often do you have to replace material or how often do you have to redo whatever thing you've done, that all adds up. And if you're buying something and you're never having to replace it or repair it or do maintenance on it and it costs more upfront, there's a reason for that. But long term, that's going to actually be better. And for the health of the pets, looking at things that will help to control the spread of disease is huge. I know when I first opened, and I'm just going to say there was nothing out there to help me and Susan when we first started. But and this is a lot of indoor facilities. They have a ton of drywall, and so there's just drywall everywhere. And you don't think about. I don't know anything about building at the time. I didn't know that you hope that the floor and the wall like match. That is not the case. That's what I found out. So when we would mop, water would seep under the floors, or when a dog would pee on the wall, it seeps under the floors. You don't realize that unless you have experience in building. And so it's really important to have those everything to be seamless. Wherever you're hosing down, you can say, my staff, we won't hose that area, or we'll be careful when we wipe something up, but that's just not going to happen.
You're dead on there. We get requests all the time where they'll buy a kennel with all four sides provided from Midmark, and they'll put it right up against a drywall wall that's not treated the correct way. So after a few months, that drywall is going to start to mold, and it will start to smell, even though you might have the right materials in your kennel. The design of the room should be thought about as well, not just not the kennel portions that you're buying from a kennel manufacturer. For instance, there's really no need to buy a back panel from any kennel manufacturer unless you're doing a back-to-back kennel option. So if you have two kennels opposite of each other. Otherwise, if you're going against a perimeter wall, if you treat that wall with the correct material, whether it's FRP or whether you're rolling epoxy up the back wall, or if it's tile or block walls that's treated the right way, that's going to be the best sanitary condition for your kennels. And also you're going to save some costs by not buying a back panel made from one of the kennel companies.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So if we're talking about cleaning, which obviously is a huge thing in the pet industry, are there certain materials that you would say are easier than others in terms of cleaning?
Certainly. Obviously, a solid surface, let's just say your gate, for instance, if it's tempered glass, that's going to be the easiest to clean. But there's trade-offs there. So if you have a full tempered glass door, you have to be concerned about airflow inside the kennel. So if you have, let's just say, 4 solid walls, you could have some stale air, especially if a pet's spending a lot of time inside the kennel. So you have to make sure either you have some ventilation built into the bottom of the kennel somehow, or have the right machinery in the ceiling to circulate that air. But as far as cleaning a solid like glass door, that's going to be easy because you see the dirt, you see the slobber that's on the kennel door, and it's very easy to clean. But I will tell you, for anyone that's been walking through these facilities, the dogs want to be interactive, and so they're going to be at the front of any kennel, regardless of the materials you're using. So they're going to have some dog slobber and just debris toward the front. It's a lot harder to see on a wire gate or a bar gate, just because you don't see it as you do on glass. A little bit harder to clean because a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of different surfaces and you have to get in crevices. So I'd say the solid is easier to clean, but make sure that you have proper ventilation in each kennel when you're doing that.
Yeah, and there's part of me that thinks it's better not to be able to see it.
Exactly, yeah. And we, to be quite honest with you, like in shelters, we see a lot of mixed materials. So we might have, let's just say, the first 18 inches to 2 feet off the ground. would be like bars or mesh. So you could walk to the kennel and the dog can smell you and they're not jumping up onto the glass. And a lot of times, if you have a privacy panel on the bottom of the gate, you'll have your dogs kangarooing. And what I mean by that is basically jumping up on the glass over and over, or just so that they can see the staff or anyone else that's walking through the facility. Mixed materials is a great way to go. You get the ventilation, but you also get the easy cleanability of glass. That would be something to consider for sure.
And what I love is you talked about there's materials that are colorful, and there's just so many options. It's almost like when you're picking out the materials for your house. I did a big remodel last year and picked a lot of stuff out. Designing and installing kennels, you have lots of choices that you can make. And I'm sure you guys help guide people as to pros and cons of a lot of those different options.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So about 6 years ago, Midmark acquired BSSI company, and they're primarily a stainless steel kennel manufacturer. And so we were really limited to a really durable material, but it's also not the warmest color. So stainless steel has a great purpose, but you can't add a lot of color to it efficiently. So we were thrilled to add Mason Company 3 years ago, and they do a fantastic job with adding color inside of each kennel. And you could have a blue area, a marble area, and it doesn't really add too much cost to your kennels, but gives you a lot of color variety. And then about 4 months ago, we acquired the Shoreline company, and so they have a whole different list of materials that they use inside of their kennels. So we really have a wide offering, and so you're not pigeonholed into the product that just one manufacturer makes. We really have the spectrum of all the materials that you could use inside of a kennel.
Yeah, we do see a lot of facilities that they have multiple types of surfaces and multiple types of enclosures within their single facility. And a lot of people who do that end up promoting certain areas of their kennel and charging more. So they might have luxury suites and they might have the basic suite. So and you might have different materials for each of those just for a different look. And they're all going to be good quality, but they're more appealing to the owner. Certain ones are more appealing to the owner or the discerning pet parent who you might want to market to for a certain type of brand, depending on your brand at your business. So that's also something to look at, is it might not be the same thing throughout your whole facility, especially when you're doing a redesign. Sometimes that comes into play with who you're trying to market the area to.
Yeah,
Scott, go ahead.
I was going to say that the biggest or the most common feedback we get is we didn't add enough luxury boarding to our facility, because those are the suites that customers are willing to pay a premium for, and they fill up first, and they're normally in the front of your facility. And we hear that consistently. I wish I would have added more luxury boarding because it's the first to go.
Yeah, we actually had a client during COVID when people really weren't booking because travel shut down, that started only boarding. She only made available her luxury suites, and it was a way to make for her to make some extra revenue during that time, but she didn't even get anybody an option. And she didn't have as many clients, obviously, but she didn't have a single person balk at that. When they were like, we need boarding, and she's like, the only thing we have is our most expensive luxury suites, and people would just book them. So I definitely think that's the way the market is going. That's the trend in the market.
Yeah, and you can do a luxury boarding that looks like a hotel room. I would recommend that you use the right materials like we talked about before. Stay away from drywall. We've seen boarding facilities actually do a stick built using commercial materials, but not designed for dog housing. And they look fantastic. They look nicer than my bedroom. They have TVs, they have treat machines, and they have everything. But make sure you're buying the correct materials. There are luxury kennel manufacturers that they're modular pieces, they're made for housing dogs. They go together very quickly, and they attach the adjoining kennels very quickly. So there are a lot of options there too. But even a standard kennel, even though it might not have that hotel room, there's so many nice materials that you can use now that are easy to clean, that look really like a Taj Mahal. So you could have a super luxury unit in the front, then you could have a luxury unit behind it. Then you could have your standard kennel for overflow. So there's really a lot of options. And if they're guests or anything like my wife and I, they're going to want the best for their animal, and they're going to justify, the additional cost, or maybe they're putting two animals in a larger luxury unit because they want to be together. I'm confident you're going to get the additional fees for the larger units.
Yeah, and that's one of the things Susan talks about a lot, is what is the revenue your business is getting per square foot. And so when you're looking at those larger, it might be a larger enclosure, it might not be, but
Mhm.
what is your pricing? And you want to make sure not just that you're paying off your investment and making a profit, which is obviously what we would recommend, but really looking at whatever space you're using for whatever service, whether it's lodging or daycare or training or whatever, that you're getting a decent amount per square foot. And you can do that calculation to make sure that you're not wasting space, basically. So that's another thing that you can definitely look at.
So
I had real quick cake. You said once they try the sweets, they won't go back. That's
there
probably
you go.
true as well.
That's more money per square foot all the time. So
Exactly.
yeah, this is a great opportunity to get questions answered by Scott. You can tell he's an expert at this. And Scott and I actually were at a design kind of one-day workshop together. And you said something during that workshop that I didn't know. As Robin said, we always learn from you guys. It was on the sizing and how there's like certain size panels. The reason like 4x6 is a common enclosure size is because of the size of the panels and shipping and transporting. It was something I didn't know.
Yeah, so we get requests from various types of applications. There we can make, or most kennel manufacturers. I don't want this just to be for Midmark, but most kennel manufacturers can ship an 8 foot panel fairly efficiently. So that's as far as we would typically recommend to make a kennel, so 8 feet deep. But we see for rigidity, 6 feet is adequate depth. And then you can vary the widths. I mean, you can go as small as 3. I don't recommend it. Maybe a 4 foot minimum, but you can go 5 or 6 wide. And so you can make the kennel large enough to house. But ideally, you want the dog to be able, the largest dog that's going to be in that kennel, to be able to turn around and not have the front end or the back end touch either side of the kennel at any point. So that's a rule of thumb. But also, not every dog is a 100-pound lab or even a lot larger dog than that. So there should be some design considerations. Obviously, you need to know your pet population, and if you do, you can have some larger kennels, but you can also have smaller kennels for the smaller dogs that don't need as much of a footprint, and that way you can really maximize your building space.
Yeah,
As
and I
far
do
as
think smaller dogs feel safer if it's not too big.
yeah,
For the
yeah, I
most
mean,
part.
and so there's a lot of different design elements that you can also do. The dogs are, for the most part, are going to want to see people walking down the aisle, but not all of them. So if you add a privacy panel, maybe off to the side of the door, for some of those dogs that might have a little bit more anxiety, they have a place that they can hide if they need to. And I agree with you. You don't want to have it too big because that can also raise their anxiety when they're boarding.
So Kirsten asked a question, what can you use instead of drywall? We're actually renovating and putting drywall up and painting with either epoxy or resin from Kennel Coat, ordering glass doors from Shoreline, which is actually part of Midmark now too. But is there something else instead of drywall that you would recommend?
Yeah, a cost-efficient way of treating the wall is adding an FRP skin. So FRP, for those that are not familiar with it, you'll see it quite often in a commercial bathroom or a car wash. It's just a great material that you can basically hose off, clean very easily, disinfect, and it's not gonna impact what's on the wall or behind the wall. So that's a cost-effective way of doing it. But there's a lot of materials out there that you can work with. If done right, the epoxy resinous material that you can take from the floor and have it seamlessly rolled up onto the wall, that is a fantastic solution. It's a little more costly to do, but that's going to last for the life of the facility if the people that are applying it are doing it correctly. And so I would highly recommend that. But there's tile. You can do that. You have to be I would recommend epoxy grout if you're going to do tile. And then when you attach any kennel to tile, it's a messy job and it's a little bit more labor intensive to punch through. But there is a lot of materials out there. I would say from a cost standpoint, FRP is going to be the entry level, but it's going to perform very well. But if you want something higher end look, the epoxy resinous finish is fantastic. And then also some of the tiles look really nice. There's glass block, which is next level stuff, but it does test your budget for sure.
If you do FRP, how do you recommend installing that on the drywall?
Yeah, so if you're going to do FRP, you just attach it, and then there's seam connection piece. If you could ideally have it a single piece in between 2 kennel walls, that would be the way to go. And then I would roll your flooring and basically add a cove up just up maybe the first 2 inches of the kennel. So there's a couple ways to do a cove. There's you can do a radius cove, so it just rolls up, or you can do a 45-degree angle cove. It's called a cant cove. It's really just 2 inches off the ground. It's very cost-effective way for a flooring person to add a cove to the perimeter of your walls. And that way, when water is coming down, or if you're cleaning the back side of the kennel, it's not going to get stuck in a crack on the back of your wall, and it's going to push down toward the drain.
Yeah, and I had the code base, which is super helpful once we got that done. And
Yeah.
I had FRP as well. So eventually, but I didn't start there. I learned that we needed it later. So yeah, that's great.
And we
So
see,
you
sorry,
drains. You mentioned drains, so can you talk about that? Because I know there's a lot of discussion, pros and cons of drains and where you place them, what kind of drains. So can you give us a drains 101 and a kennel setup?
absolutely. So there is a lot of opinions out there, and so we just know the questions to ask. There's a lot of people that going with no drains, and so there's some really fantastic
In the
cleaning
kennel? In the kennel area?
in the kennel. Yeah. So there's, and you mean, if you're going to do that, obviously you have to have a pretty rigorous schedule of making sure that the animals are having a chance to relieve themselves, not inside the kennel. And
But there's zoning too, because I know in a lot of
exactly.
cases that's a decision based on zoning, not so much based on what they would want to do. The pet
Right.
facility manager or owner.
But assuming you want to go with kennels, we see most commonly a trench, and that's what's been used. As I mean, as you folks know, like for many years. And there are some drawbacks. Although you're going to save on cost, if you think about it, you're having fluids go from one kennel to the next kennel to the next kennel to the next kennel, and most of the times you do have a grate, but there is an opportunity for cross contamination. I would say more importantly, there is an opportunity for smells to accumulate. So when I think of drains, if you have the budget, the optimal solution is to have one single drain in the back of the kennel. But that is also the most costly, and it's done so for a couple of reasons. One, you got to buy a drain for every kennel, so there's a cost involved there. And then also you have to slope each kennel floor so it hits that single drain. So you can do it with just one single drain. There's also individual trench drains. And if you've been to any hotels recently, you might see a long rectangle where the drain used to be. And all that is, it's a plate, and underneath there is a small drain that it slopes down to. It's costly to do, but if the smaller the hole, the less chance that you have for smells. And if something does clog, it's usually typically easy to clean. When you have the large trench, you have a greater chance of cross contamination between kennels or smells. And we're seeing people move away from them, but there's new technology or technology that's out there as far as flushing systems that can help clean those units. But again, you are having fluids move right across the facility. So there are some trade-offs there. If you pay a little bit more upfront, you can go with the individual drains. You have to have a skilled contractor, because just think about when you're in your bathtub or your shower at home, all that water somehow goes down into that little tiny drain. And that's typically a prefab molded tub. But we're asking a general contractor to slope a concrete floor just to get to that little drain. And some of them can do it great, but some of them aren't that great at it. So there is a little bit of a risk there. So I know that's a convoluted response to your question, Susan, but there are trade-offs for your drain strategy.
Well, and I think it just reinforces why it's so valuable to work with someone like Midmark that has this experience that you can help in the planning, because especially for people that are starting out new and haven't been into the animal care world, there's so many things that you just can't even imagine that you need to know to do it right. There's great value that your expertise provides, and you guys are so good about sharing it.
Yeah, we have a team of folks that are happy to ask the questions. But again, we might not have all the answers, but we certainly know many of the questions to ask. And so we're happy to walk through that, especially if you make these mistakes on paper, that's when you want to make it, versus once you're in construction and then you have to handle the issue, and no one wants to hear the two evil words, which is change order, to add to the cost of the project.
Or like me, where I didn't do lodging, but just designed for daycare, which really didn't exist at the time that Susan and I had operated our daycare. But I found all my mistakes up after I was up and running,
Right.
which is even worse than during construction. At least during construction, you can change things. And when you're up and running, it's a totally different thing. So it's always good to learn those lessons before you're actually in the process of getting dogs in your facility. And operating your facility. Any other last comments you want to share before we wrap up? And if you have any last minute questions, anyone that's watching, you can post those in the comments as well, and we'll get to those.
Well, I would like Scott to talk a little bit about some of your daycare products, because I think you guys have the room dividers, and then you've got these really cool kennels that'll collapse.
Yeah, you nailed it, Susan. So basically, we do have a lot of mobile dividers, so you could take a large play area and break it down to in a couple of minutes, and maybe not even that long, and really cut down the space and allow you to have maybe an active dog area and then maybe a not so active dog area. Or if you just don't have that large of a attendance that day, you can make it smaller and more manageable for you. But we have some pretty neat applications too, where you could have a kennel that it goes completely flat against the wall. And then when you need it for maybe overflow or maybe even a timeout kennel just for 10, 15 minutes, within a couple seconds, you can pull this. It's a collapsible kennel, pull it out, and then place the dog into that application. The Mason Company has a fantastic solution there, and also Shoreline has some collapsible options as well. So there's a lot of options out there that really, what we've learned, especially over the last 2 years, is that we need a design for flexibility. And so we're seeing a lot of modular components being entertained inside of a facility, because you might have a boarding facility that all of a sudden becomes heavier into daycare, and they would need a larger play area. And then when the time of the year changes to more boarding, that you want to be able to shift back and forth. So it's a lot of great products to consider there.
So Michaela just said, we're looking at the space saver kennels, which is those, I think that is those collapsible kennels that
Yep.
you just mentioned. And we have seen those used in a couple of facilities. I recently saw a video of somebody pulling them out, like pulling out a whole row, and it didn't take very long at all. It was a video they showed of their facility. And I've seen them most frequently used for exactly what you're talking about, Scott, where they want to use that room for overflow lodging. So during the day, it might be getting used for daycare, and then in the evening, it's being used for lodging, especially when they have peak season and they need more room. It's also, I think, really applicable if you're doing enrichment daycare. I don't personally like to have dogs in a large play group with other dogs just on the outside watching. So I wouldn't use it necessarily for day-long play. Half the dogs are sitting there watching the other dogs play and the other dogs are playing, because I think you're going to stress out the dogs that are watching. But for enrichment or for a timeout, like you just mentioned, I think that's a great use for it, where you just need to give a dog a quick break, and that's easy to get to the enclosure to put the dog in there, or wait till they can move to another enclosure with more privacy. I think that's a great application. But I also think for those that do daycare enrichment and you have those smaller groups, it's a great way to do like puzzle toy activities. Maybe you have a group of 6 and you have 5 in enclosures doing a puzzle toy, and you're working with the 6th dog one-on-one, and then you're just rotating those dogs in that room. I think that's a really good application, which would allow you to do more with your enrichment group with less traveling. So you're not running down the hall, putting a dog in an enclosure, bringing them back out, doing some training, running them back down. So I think for enrichment, if you're doing enrichment, I think those are a really good resource as well. Someone had said, hang on, Denise said, we're putting together a business plan for a new build. How do I go about starting the process with a builder? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, and so I would recommend you reach out to a kennel manufacturer if you're considering kennels outside of a stick-built kennel, and they will do a lot of the design work for you, and so you can have that work done. Most of the time, there's no charge involved, because in hopes that they win your business, and so they can make a lot of recommendations up front, and then you can take that to your builder and say, hey, this is what I'm looking to achieve. And then as far as selecting a builder, there's a ton of builders out there. Current state, it's a little bit harder to find builders on as timely as we did in the past. But if you can, there's some animal care specialists. I would strongly consider them. A lot of these companies are national, and they have the expertise about how to control smells outside of the kennels. A big one that we didn't really even talk about is how to mitigate noise. And so there's materials that they can recommend. Obviously, your architect will be involved with that, but anything you can do to reduce the noise level for the animals that are going to be in the kennels and for the staff that's going to be there is going to pay off too. So I would recommend get your design down tight, and you can work with an architect or with a kennel manufacturer. They'll do that work for you. Obviously, the architect has some fees attached, but the kennel manufacturers most likely will do it at no charge. And then you take that to your builder and then have a plan before, rather than have them help you walk through the process. They might have never built a daycare facility ever. So they might not know about the slopes that are going to be required, or the materials that you definitely need to use. I would do that work up front. And consulting with Robin and Susan, you guys are pioneers in this industry, and you guys offer so much to the industry as far as guidance goes for before you embark on one of these projects. Everyone that's here today, you're in good hands.
We appreciate
Definitely have opinions, but a lot of it's lessons learned.
it. Yeah, which
Don't do what I did.
KQ said that is how we learn the best, is by making mistakes. Okay, we have one last question real quick. I was actually thinking about asking this, Michaela, so that's awesome that you did. How popular are indoor-outdoor enclosures connected with a dog door now? Because that used to be pretty much the only thing that we saw 20 some years ago, but said that is what we currently have, but wondering if we should do it again with our expansion.
Yeah, I think you touched on it earlier. It depends on the zoning. So that's a big part of it. And also depends a little bit on the climate. If you're in Florida or maybe a milder climate, it's a no-brainer if you can get it. If you're in the Northeast or someplace that has a lot of rain, or maybe it's even too hot to do it, then you might want to reconsider. But as far as the pet owners that are gonna see the options of having indoor outdoor, I think it's gonna be a huge value add if you have that option versus just going into a strip mall where the dogs are locked in certain small square footage for the week that they're on vacation. So I would highly recommend it if you can get the zoning and you have the space, and especially if you have a climate that supports it. It's a no-brainer for me.
Have you seen any of those, Susan, or any more or less? Because I feel like there's less than there used to be.
I think that, yeah, but I do think I have seen a trend of people trying to at least have some.
Yeah.
We may not be able to do them all, and usually those are higher priced too because of providing that. So
Yeah, and I recently saw it in a conversation on a Facebook group that I'm in about safety, and particularly dealing with fire. Like if something happened where they needed to get the dogs out of the indoor area to get out of the smoke or whatever. And I had never really thought about it for that, but I thought that was an interesting thought to be able to quickly let all dogs out of assuming they would go to the outdoor area. But I thought that was interesting. So yeah, and I think it does a lot depend on your environment too, the climate.
Yep.
And then okay, go ahead, Susan.
pull up that question. I'll ask something in between while you pull that up. So with COVID and everything, we know that manufacturing has had delays, and also someone's wanting like to add enclosures or do a remodel. What is your recommended lead time of when they actually order their enclosures to when they want them up and making revenue?
Yeah, so it's a tough one for all manufacturers right now. Traditionally, we've run for your standard kennel anywhere from as short as 4 weeks for some of our standard product. For the Mason product, which has a lot of different color options, a lot of material options, that's really been a standard 12-week lead time. We saw lead times, depending on the product you're looking for, go from that 12-week time frame up to about 48 weeks, and that's a year. And that's it. Just if it was just one small component of the kennel, maybe it's an extrusion or whatever it might be, we couldn't get it. I am happy to say that we're seeing those supply chain issues slow down. They're certainly not past us, because as soon as we end this conversation, we might get a red alert about something. But we're starting to see it to be a little bit more of a normal condition. But I would say, like for instance, we're seeing some of our facilities, we're back at that 12 to 13 week lead time. So that is a good thing. What we're countering now is there's such a strong for kennels and for animal housing in general that we have the supply chain challenges on this side, and we have demand that's almost 80% higher than it was 2 years ago. And so we're having a difficult time keeping up with the demand that's out there, even in a normal condition. It's just so many people want kennels and they want it right away, which it is a frustration to customers today. I would say we're doing a fantastic job at trying to drive waste out of our manufacturing process, but it's small incremental progress. We can't just double our production overnight. So we're trying our best to meet the demand, but right now we are a little bit in a behind condition just with the unprecedented demand we're seeing out in the marketplace.
All right, so last question, really. This is the last question. Actually, Denise said she conducted a survey of 400 dog owners in her town, and the indoor-outdoor runs were the number one sought after type of boarding by far over traditional cage-free or luxury. So that's cool. I love that
That's
you
a
did
good
a
point.
survey, Denise. But the last question was, I got to find it real quick. Oh, so Cheryl said we are finishing up our architectural sketches on a remodel. Like they want 8 kennels and are looking at 2 back-to-back rows of 4. Is there a manufacturer you'd recommend?
So most companies can provide that option. So it wouldn't just be Midmark. I know Shoreline can do it. Mace can do back to back, and they can do it in those dimensions. So you should have a lot of options to consider there.
Awesome. All right, Susan, do you want to close out? And I got to go grab the links that we need.
Yeah, well, Scott, we thank you for your time. It flew by, and quality animal enclosures are an investment that will ensure the safety and health of the pets in your care. We're a big proponent about just making that investment because it will last so long. But we're also excited that Midmark is one of our top sponsors of our live event that we're having in Jacksonville coming up April 6th and 7th. And so who did you say was going to be there?
So Doug Berner from our team is going to be down there. He is our specialist in animal housing. He's been doing it close to 30 years now. We're thrilled to be a part of this event and to partner with you, and we're excited to be down there in April.
Yeah.
And